Hello, I'm Ros Atkins. Thanks for joining me on World Have Your Say. And of course, we're going to talk about the Eurozone. We've got warnings of a fresh recession, of a lost decade, and of a crisis spiralling out of control. Of course, there's intense pressure on those of you in Italy and in Greece, as well as those of you in Germany and France. You may have to pick up the bill to sort out this crisis. Wherever you're watching in the world, you can call us, tweet us using the WISE hashtag. We've got guests in Italy, Greece, Germany, the Netherlands and America waiting to speak to you. We all know this crisis is very serious. The question now is, what must be done to get out of it? Lots to talk about. Let's get in the studio. Let me introduce you to our first three guests. Elisabetta Fiorito is a radio journalist in Rome. In New York is Catherine Rampell, economics reporter at the New York Times. And just outside Paris in Chantilly is Laurent Seillard, a French economics journalist. All three of you, you're very welcome to World Have Your Say. Elisabetta, maybe you could lead us off here. What do you think is the absolute priority now for the Eurozone?
Well, nobody knows, but what we can say now, the problem is that we have an economic issue here, but our policy in Europe is still weak. What happened in these next few days in Italy is very important because it happened that Europe said that we had to do some reform, and we made them. So we approved this stability or austerity bill, as you wanted to call it, just passed the Senate. It will go in the lower chamber. It will be approved tomorrow. Tomorrow Berlusconi will resign, and probably before markets open on Monday, we are going to have a new appointed prime minister. He is Mario Monti. So it is very important now that European policy is getting stronger in order to make Greece, Italy, or maybe tomorrow France approve laws in order to get our currency stronger and stronger.
So regarding France, actually, of course, the situation we have here is a bit different, but we are now facing a new challenge. As it's just been said, the first step is that we definitely need an implementation of a plan of measures in Greece. And so there should be at least a minimum of political stability in Greece to implement, so to allow Greece to get the financial support from the European Union and from the IMF. And after that, the situation of Italy could also be solved because, in fact, Italy has a very good budget situation. It has a huge debt, but at the same time, it has what we call a primary surplus in the budget. So in addition to that, France has to fight now against speculation on the financial markets. And it is, of course, a deal between, or common interest between France and Germany to keep the status on the AAA for France and to keep France out of this danger. But as it's been said, it must be done first. We have to, keep the measures regarding Greece and then Italy implemented first.
I would say that from the perspective of the United States, a lot of economists are worried about contagion issues that could basically send the world back into recession the same way that we saw the financial crisis that sort of began in the United States in 2007 and 2008 hit the rest of the world. And I think that what a lot of economists here are concerned about is that there is an impression that there is an orderly resolution coming. The threat of a referendum in Greece last week threw markets into a panic, and you saw that credit was already starting to tighten up in the United States for borrowers that had a lot of European exposure. And so I think the greatest concern is just that there is a perception, at the very least, of leadership and cooperation, and that that basically the world is not going to be fearing a sudden default from Greece that could obviously have a domino effect that leads to a number of the other heavily indebted countries having problems, greater problems as well.
Well, all three of you, Catherine, you talk about leadership. Come Monday, it's a very likely scenario that both Greece and Italy will have new leaders. Do you think those countries are now in better hands to address these many, many problems? Maybe, Catherine, you could start this time.
The impression from the United States is that is very much the case. I mean, we are obviously not as closely in tune with the political climate in Europe, but the impression here, at the very least, is that basically these are technocrats taking the reins, that Papademos is a very well-respected economist, very highly trained. He has expressed support for keeping the Eurozone together, for basically avoiding a Greek default, and sudden restructuring at all costs. So I think that there is the hope that with sort of the, I don't know if this is a fair characterization, but the good old boys network of politicians out of the way, and that the people who hopefully know more about the economic, particularly global economic consequences of resolving all of this in an orderly manner in charge, that there is less to worry about.
Elizabeth, I can see you smiling. What's your view? Do you think your country will be in better hands when Berlusconi stands down?
Let's say we hope it. Mario Monti is a technocrat. Karen is right, but I have to say that the first thing that he said was that he wants to cut politicians' privileges. And we have a big expense of politician expenses that they are so high. We have a lot of deputies, a lot of senators. They earn more than the colleagues in Europe. And this oligarchy, this political oligarchy, is stopping our economy. And Mario Monti said that development will increase as soon as we stop the privileges. So maybe the old boys, as Karen said, are back. Let's see what they can do. I hope it will be better. I know, and we all know in Italy, that it's not going to be very easy, that our country is a strong economy, but there are a lot of things that they have to be changed, especially in the political class. No matter if left wing or right wing, it doesn't matter, but the political expenses have to drop.
Yes, well, at least it seems that, I don't know if the change of leaders really make a big change, but at least it will have a psychological impact, and that will probably reassure, for instance, the financial markets, because we have now, both in Greece and Italy, profiles of people who have a clear background, experience in financial matters, both in Greece and in Italy. Well, we don't know yet in Italy, but if it's, for instance, a profile of Mario Monti, then it would give the impression that it will not be again a politician play, but that we will have people in charge who will really try to implement the right measures and be able to continue the plan. After that, of course, it's a long process, because we're now talking about a program that could last minimum 1, 2, 3, maybe 5 years before we come back to a clear situation in those countries. But at least if, for instance, the financial market and the public opinions have the impression that what is made is good and that it should be done, and that it will be implemented because the people who are in charge are not playing political tricks or political games beside the scene, then it will probably move forward. But it's now very key to come to that point, saying in addition that, of course, within Europe and within the Eurozone, it is still key to have the German-French axis, the German-French not leadership, but I would say at least the German and French common policy that will support the whole.
Laurent, Catherine and Elisabetta, thank you for your comments just for the moment. Those of you watching, wherever you are in the world, tuned to the BBC, you're always welcome to get involved. You can tweet us using the WISE hashtag, phone us up, we'll call you back. Country code 44 2070 83 72 72. We're not disputing whether this Eurozone crisis is serious. It's gone beyond that. What we're discussing is where you think the policy priorities should be. Call us up, country code 44 2070 83 72 72. On this issue of whether leaders should be elected, we look like we could have two leaders in Greece and Italy who haven't been. Well, the European Council President Herman Van Rompuy has been speaking on Friday. He departed from the speech, the text of the speech he was delivering in France, to say the country, and he's talking about Italy, he says the country needs reforms, not elections. That's the European Council President saying Italy needs reforms, not elections. I wonder whether you agree with that. You can get involved online, facebook.com/World Have Your Say. Let's bring in a guest from Berlin. Moritz Schuller is with us. He's comment editor of Der Tagesspiegel newspaper. Moritz, thanks for your time today. Do you agree with that from the European Council President that reform is necessary in Italy and Germany and Greece, not elections?
Reform is always useful, but I think that the current crisis has two elements. One is clearly a financial one, and it's difficult to get that one under control. But the other one that's probably even worse, or a greater problem, is one of legitimacy. The democracy is draining out of the Union, and comments like that from Van Rompuy just underscore how problematic the whole crisis is for the political status of the Union. We need more elections, and perhaps as many elections as we need reforms. But to say that we need the one and not the other is a disaster.
Thanks for speaking to us, Moritz. There's Moritz Schuller, comment editor of Der Tagesspiegel. Tell us if you agree with Moritz. If you can, email worldhaveyoursay@bbc.com. The text number and the phone number is also on the screen regularly throughout the programme. Here comes a break. We'll come back in a moment. I'm Ross Atkins. Thank you very much indeed for joining me on today's World Have Your Say. It will come as no surprise if you're just turning on your televisions. We're talking about the Eurozone crisis, of course, and you're all sending in the areas which you think now need to be the focus of the politicians' attention. What is the priority now to try and fix this Eurozone crisis? By all means, call us up, text us, Facebook, tweet or email. All the contact details are on the screen. Still with us live from Rome is Elisabetta. She's a radio journalist. Catherine is with us in New York, and we have Laurent in France, and we'll see two of them straight away. I think Elisabeth is going to be back with us in 5 minutes' time. Let's bring in Tanya first of all, though. She's a lawyer in Heidelberg in Germany, and she joins us via webcam. Tanya, where do you think the priority should be now for the Eurozone? Tanya, can you hear me okay? Doesn't sound like the sound's working on Tanya's webcam. We'll sort that out. In the meantime, let me read you a couple of messages here. Dennis in England says, no matter what happens, someone's certain to make a sackload of money out of this. Jane is emailing from Pisa saying there are increased redundancies and stagnant salaries here. And Catherine in New York, perhaps you could respond to this one. A tweet from Owen Henry Wilson, who says, lest the Germans forget, inflicting almighty austerity can lead to very bad outcomes. Do you think there is an assumption here that the austerity packages going through in Italy and Greece are certain to work?
Nothing is certain to work, of course, but the problem facing these countries right now is that they have so much debt and they don't have a clear path to paying that back. You know, there's just no way out of the mess if they continue with the policies that they have now. The austerity measures, of course, are intended to help address those debt problems, whether it's through reducing the welfare state and various other types of state spending or raising taxes. I mean, those are obviously very unpleasant things and very painful things, especially for people who are losing their jobs or who are otherwise, you know, losing parts of their salary or their pensions or anything else. But, you know, there's no easy solution to any of this, and who knows whether any one possibility will work. But I think what we're dealing with right now is sort of the lesser of, or least of many evils.
And those of you watching will recognize two of the faces on your screen. Not the third, though. There's Catherine in New York, Laurent in Chantilly, just outside of Paris. And we're joined now by Maria, who's a teacher in Rome. Maria, are you convinced that the austerity package going through the Senate and the lower house this weekend is the right thing for Italy?
Sorry, I can't hear very well what you're saying. Can you repeat it, please?
Are you satisfied that your parliament is doing the right thing with this austerity package?
Well, finally, they did something. I mean, I must say it was a long way because they start talking about it in July or August and tried to find a solution and finally at the end they did it. But perhaps it could be too late now. I don't know it, but we are just on the verge of a big crisis in Italy, worse than the one we thought we had, you know. And this is what people, I mean, I think about it, and what all the people I know are thinking about it. We are very worried about the situation because the government did handle at the right time when there was still time to handle, and now we hope, and I hope, in the new government with Mario Monti as Prime Minister, and I hope this new government will be able to boost the reforms Italy badly needs.
Well, Maria, those hopes you're talking about are shared by Danielle, who's emailed us from Milan. She says, this weekend will be make or break for Italy. Either Monti's government is sworn in or Italy will collapse. And if you're wondering why all this talk is about democracy, it's coming up again, it's because Mario Monti is a former EU commissioner, and Mr. Papademos, who's just become the Greek Prime Minister, is a former employee of the European Central Bank. Both are technocrats, as they're called, not necessarily career politicians who've spent their time getting votes. They've spent their time making banks work and making administrations work. Well, a moment ago, we tried to speak to Tanya in Heidelberg. The line wasn't too hot. Let's see if it's better this time. Tanya, you're a lawyer in Heidelberg. Tell us your feelings about what's happening in the Eurozone.
Hello. I must say I have some doubts whether sovereignty of the states is really protected enough in this crisis, because I see the European Commission babysitting countries, directing political developments in the countries, and I really wonder whether the people of those nations will really go with that and be happy, even when they have to suffer from the politics from these technocrats. Of course.
Tanya, your line's gone, but not before you've made an interesting point. Maria, you're in Rome. Are you concerned that Italian policy is now being decided by people in Brussels and not in Rome?
What I can say is that the Italian politics, Italian politics in Italy is something we haven't had for a long time. Because what we had was a government who wasn't doing much for the country, but quite a lot for themselves, for politicians, and not for the people. So many Italians just welcome any kind of government who can handle a bit the situation, not only the politics, but also and above all at the moment the economical problems in Italy. And that's I don't think people are very worried in Italy about the idea of having a technocrat as head of government. On the contrary, Italians are really disgusted by the politics and the politicians we have at the moment.
So that's a fascinating point, that you're actually saying you would rather have technocrats, people who aren't overtly political, than politicians in power. I wonder if those of you watching outside of Italy have sympathy with that point of view. By all means, get in touch through Facebook, facebook.com/World Have Your Say. I can see a long list of countries where you're calling in from: Ethiopia, Finland, Dagestan and Japan, just 4 of them. Let's bring in Nuala from the World Have Your Say newsroom to find out more of what you're saying in your phone calls.
Well, another few countries I can add to that, Roz: Russia, France and Malaysia. The team here have just taken some calls from listeners there. And there's really two themes that are emerging. One, just the conversation you've been having about democracy, or indeed the lack of it. And Savo in Moscow called in to say each of these countries is getting their own governors from the EU and Brussels, and they'll run the countries by EU orders. Nothing got to do with the Greek or the Italian people. And the other point is really about the scale of the crisis. Thierry in Paris asks, Italy needs 830 billion euros. Just where is the money coming from? Well, join Savo and Thierry in the global conversation. Use the hashtag WHYS or in the ways on your screen now.
Thank you very much indeed, Nuala. Well, I suppose in a very basic way, that money has to come from taxation, from the expansion of the economy and from borrowing. Let's bring in Laurent outside Paris in Chantilly. Do you think it is possible for the Italians to fill in that kind of hole, debt of this size?
Yes, I wouldn't be so pessimistic because, first of all, everybody has to remember that what the Commission expresses is in fact just the tradition of the translation of the wishes of all the states which are members of the Union. So it's the idea that it would be only, a technocratic sequence or technocratic take of power is a bit, it does not reflect the reality. The reality is that more than ever, the European Union is now led by the major members of the Union, and that what is requested actually from Italy, and Italy is a rich country, which will probably assure its debt, it's just to give a clear political signal. And
I'm going to jump in here, Lauren, just because we're right up to the news and the next break. I can see Tanya shaking her head. We'll let the two of you come back with everyone else to carry on talking about this. Of course, if you're watching and want to join in as well, get in touch using all the contact details on the screen. Speak to you in a minute. Let me introduce you to our first three guests of this half hour. Lauren's an economic specialist, a journalist just outside Paris in Chantilly. We also have Tanya, who is a lawyer in Heidelberg. But first of all, let's go to Athens and speak to Nikos, who's joining us. He's a stockbroker. And Nikos, I'm guessing you've had a very busy week.
Well, good afternoon from Athens. Yes, indeed, it was a very busy week, and at last it ends up with a government in Greece.
And is that government good news for people like you, stock market traders?
Definitely. The new government will restore some calm in the markets, especially the turbulent Greek stock exchange. And hopefully we'll move on with all the structural reforms that are much needed.
Some people say, well, hold on, this government hasn't been elected, we need elections. What do you say to them?
Well, right now, the Prime Minister is a well-regarded technocrat, an architect of the Eurozone, and a very deeply knowledgeable person that can really help Greece sign all the treaties that has to, and then move on, restructure the economy, and lead us safely to the elections of February, according to his mandate.
And Lauren, perhaps I could bring you in here. There's been much made this week about how much Italy is having to pay to borrow money. And for a 10-year loan, the interest rates have gone over 7%. That's seen as being significant. Do you think that stock market traders, and I'm not obviously holding Nikos personally responsible, but do you think stock market traders have a productive role to play in this crisis?
Yeah, for sure. Of course, because if there is a pressure, it's of course the pressure on the financial markets. If Italy or Greece could borrow money at 1.5%, as Germany can do at the moment, it would be, of course, it would make the situation much easier. So that's why, that's why the members of the European Union now have to find the way just to, just a way to diminish the role of the financial markets. The problem being that if Italy, which is a rich country, has to borrow money at 7%, well, that's not, it can't make it. I mean, it's just too much. It will be the same for France, if France, because now it's more than 3% for the French state, if it wants to issue new bonds. So it's the problem right now is to find the good solutions, not to give the financial market the tools to make speculation.
All right, so you're saying don't let their speculation dominate. You used one phrase. You said we've got to diminish their role. Both Tanya and Nikos were allowing themselves wry smiles. I wonder what that was about. Tanya, do you agree that the markets need to have a diminished role?
Very much. I think we need a regulation of banks and their products, and we definitely needed that much, as many people already.
So, one moment, Tanya. Sorry, your line is playing up again. But Nikos, why should traders and why should the markets keep a vital role here?
Well, the markets are knowledgeable. They can assess the situation, and obviously there is always a speculation factor, but we shouldn't forget that fundamentally European economics are not sound. There are many problems, they have to be resolved, and unfortunately the last couple of years the European Union hasn't done that much about it.
Thank you very much indeed for joining us, Nikos. We appreciate your time at the end of a very, very busy week. I can see that calls are coming in from Canada, Ghana, the Faroe Islands, also the Scilly Isles, which seems scarcely believable. Very small set of islands just off the southwest of England. A long way from the Scilly Isles is Kenya. Wanjiru has posted on our Facebook page from there. She says, the austerity measures will not work for Greece. It's too little too late. Greece must leave the Eurozone and get back to its currency. Laurent, would you support that?
No, I think it's too late for that. I mean, it would probably have been a good idea before, or actually it would have been a good decision maybe to say, well, maybe Greece should not join the Eurozone. But now it's too late. I mean, now it's been made. I don't think that will change, actually, that the question of the Eurozone will really change the point. The pending question is the budget and debt situation of each individual state, and the currency will not change it, because if Greece now, if Greece had the possibility to leave the Eurozone and come back to the drachma, it would be just a disaster for the Greece economy, for the Greek banks. So it is just not feasible. So that's why now it's too late. And because it's too late, we have to keep to this Eurozone as it is defined and just try to avoid any further problem.
Okay, so you say it's too late. The path is a good one, but you've got to stick to it. Tanya, why don't you come in here?
I think it's time for them to step out and to solve their problems at the bottom. You know, they have to really attack the problems in the Greek social system, in the pension scheme system, in the political society there. We won't solve their problems. As much money we can print, but we can't solve the problems which are inherent in. It's just gonna transport into the future.
Thank you very much, Tanya. It's fantastic having you on the programme. I wish your line was as fantastic as it is to have you on the show. Thank you very much all the same. This is Tanya, a lawyer in Heidelberg. I can see Joanna's watching us in Spain. Thanks for your comment, Joanna. She says, comments are reflecting what the youth is saying. They are far from a generation which have had privileged lives. Our older generation has a different perspective. We did not lead Europe to a disaster. We worked very hard, had hard lives growing up too. That word privilege is an interesting one, Laurent. I heard Mario Monti use it, saying it's time for an end to privilege, and that was widely meant to mean it's time for the upper classes, the political class, to stop enjoying so many privileges. I'm assuming you agree with that.
Yes, of course. I mean, each country has to do the job. Each government has now to take the right measures and to implement them. And of course, as it's been said, it is also to the Greek population and to the Greek elites to do the job. We cannot do it for them. And it's regarding Greece, it's probably a long way. But at the same time, we have resources. I mean, there is growth in Asia, even if there is some soft landing in China. The situation is not so bad in the States. There is not enough growth in Europe, but it come back. And all the major markets in Europe are rich countries. So we all have the capacity to do that. The problem is that we should definitely stop the habit of making a new debt. And in fact, what I just wanted to say just before is that although we don't want it, the financial market ask the governments to do the things. And in fact, the pressure the financial markets have at the moment is that, in fact, they tell the governments of the European and of the Eurozone just to change their policies.
Well, and certainly, I think it's worth me coming in here and explaining that a lot of the pressure coming from the markets is on the ECB to become a lender of last resort. That means the ECB could buy up a lot of debt where there was some insecurity around it, and that would calm all the doubts which the markets have, because the ECB would say, we're backing up this debt. The trouble is, Germany doesn't want to do that because it's too much of a financial commitment, or so some people in Germany say. So that is why there's a tension at the moment between what the markets would like from the ECB and what the Germans would like. Laurent, thank you very much for your contributions from just outside of Paris. Those of you watching will be able to see Catherine in New York and also Maria, a teacher in Rome, joining me. We'll go back to them to carry on our conversation in a couple of minutes' time. I'm Ross Atkins. Thanks for joining me on today's World Have Your Say. We're talking about the Eurozone. Maria in Palermo's emailed us. Italy's big problem is tax evasion, she says. Until now, only honest employees have paid and the rich haven't. We'll see if Silvio Berlusconi's successor introduces anything to deal with those problems which you're describing. Let's also bring in Nuala from the World Have Your Say newsroom, because that's where all of your calls are going. What are we hearing, Nuala?
Well, latest calls we've just taken are from viewers in Somalia, Holland and Djibouti. And the main thing occupying you right now is still this theme of democracy. This take from Robert in Paris. The only real long-term solution is a federal government in Europe. We should forget about national sovereignty and join together. Now, this is a view that's echoed by Lepa in Toronto. She says, it reminds me of the disintegration of Yugoslavia, when all the individual governments were too selfish and didn't work together enough. They need a stronger European government. But I did just hear Franco in Milan speaking to Tim on our team here, so spare thought for those right in the middle. He called to make this point: we're in a hurricane, and our politicians are in the eye of the hurricane, where nothing happens. If you'd like to use the hashtag WHYS, maybe you agree with Franco, or give us a call, text or email on the addresses and numbers that are on your screen right now.
Thanks very much indeed, Nuala. And if you do phone up and don't get on this edition, don't forget that in about 3.5 hours' time, World Have Your Say Extra is back here on BBC World News. And Nuala will be hosting World Have Your Say on the radio, BBC Radio, in just over an hour's time. Now let's bring in a phone call from Tanya, not the same Tanya we spoke to a little while ago. This Tanya is in Eindhoven in the Netherlands. Hi there, Tanya. Tell us your take on the Eurozone crisis.
Well, I've been listening in on the internet, and what I keep hearing is talk about sovereignty. And somebody made an interesting remark to me yesterday and said the United States is a country with a lot of debt, and especially California has been on the brink of bankruptcy for ages, and nobody is kicking California out of the United States. So now we're in Europe and the Eurozone, and we're considering kicking out Greece out of the Eurozone, or should we get rid of Italy? And are we... The point with Europe is we're all very sovereign states. When we started the Euro, there were rules and regulations set out, and we're supposed to adhere to them, and we didn't.
Well, Tanya, let me come in here, because it seems to me the perfect person to respond to the point that you're making. Tanya, just hold your thought there a moment, because I'm sorry for interrupting you, but the point you're making is a pressing one, and I wanted to bring Catherine from the New York Times in, because she's the perfect person to respond. What do you make of that comparison which Tanya was making, Catherine?
Between the United States and the European Union?
Well, and also the way that the US has dealt with California's problems versus how the EU and the Eurozone has dealt with Greece's.
Well, our systems of governance are very different. We have a centralized fiscal authority here in a way that doesn't exist in Europe. I mean, there's a centralized financial authority in Europe, but in the United States, everything, nationwide in terms of total federal spending is set by congressmen and senators in Washington. So it's a very different dynamic And you have a system where the federal government has been giving a great deal of support to the states. Not as much recently, but earlier in the recession. I mean, you saw major amounts of money being given to states that were in trouble because they had high healthcare expenses going up. Michigan was in lots of trouble and still is, and it's getting federal support. It's a very different dynamic. And part of the reason why that's helpful, that there is a centralized fiscal authority, is that it's easier for the United States government to borrow in order to fund this type of support than it is for Michigan or for California. And because there isn't quite the same system and willingness in Europe for essentially the European Union to bail out any particular member state, it works very differently. And I think that the attachment to the overall union probably feels very differently to Europeans than it does to Americans.
We appreciate you addressing Tanya's point. And Tanya, thank you very much for coming on to make it. Catherine, I know that you need to go, so thank you very much for coming on World Have Your Say, and do come back on very, very soon. Tanya, thank you very much indeed to you too. A reminder, if you're online, you can follow the discussion at facebook.com/World Have Your Say. Still with us from Rome is Maria. And Maria, you're a teacher. I'm very curious to know what the children at your school are making of this crisis.
The children in the school?
Are they aware that Italy has big problems? Do they talk about it?
I can't hear you, I'm sorry.
That's a shame. Never mind. Let me
while
we sort that out, let's bring in Enrico. He's a businessman in Turin. Enrico, welcome to the programme. Tell us how people are talking about this in Turin. Looks like we're not having about as much luck here as Italy's economy's had in the last few months. Let's go back to Laurent in France. Laurent, I hope you can hear me, or I'm all on my own.
Yes, no, but I just wanted to make a comment with what has just been said, the comparison between the United States and Europe. Indeed, the European Union is not a combination of United States, but it is clear that the only solution we can get out of the crisis in the Eurozone is fiscal integration. That is to say, we have different states, we have different countries, different governments. The only way we can get out of it is to have a better coordinated, integrated fiscal policy.
But do you want that, Laurent? Because lots of people in France don't.
Well, I mean, we don't have that much room of maneuver now. We have common interests between Italy, France, Germany, even Greece. So now it means that, for instance, if you have a VAT, VAT of 19% in one country, of course it's difficult if you have for the same product VAT at 5% in the other.
Perhaps I'm going to have to jump in here because we're right out of time, but perhaps that's an issue that Nuala and everyone on World Have Your Say's radio edition can pick up on in a couple of hours' time. How much the countries in the Eurozone want to give up control of their fiscal policy. Well, to all of you who've taken part, those of you I could hear and those of you I couldn't, very good to speak to you. I'll be back next week. Goodbye.